Hi, I'm Ben Duncan. Imagine entering a space where Russian, Vietnamese, and Somali are all being spoken, where differing cultural norms and expectations converge. Now, layer all those dynamics on top of the emergency situation. That's the reality of the DRC. Times of crisis bring diverse communities together, and we need to be ready to support all of our guests, regardless of religion, race, ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation. Today, we'll be focusing on the different cultural considerations that go into operating a DRC. We're going to hear from some of the most experienced intercultural communicators in our DRCs. Tammy Yamamoto of the Department of Public Health and Emergency Preparedness in Washington County has been building programs and promoting education for diverse communities for several years. And Scotty Scott and Daniel Garcia of Multnomah County's Office of Diversity and Equity both have deep expertise and experience in the cultural issues that you'll face in a DRC. What they have to share with you today is going to help you be more effective and more comfortable navigating the cultural issues that will come up in the DRC. So thank you for taking the time to learn some new skills before disaster strikes. Don't forget, this is part of a series all about operating disaster resource centers, and we have lots of other topics you're welcome to check out. Okay, let's go see our cultural experts.
Hi, I'm Tammy Yamamoto, and welcome to my office. I'm here to help you feel as confident as possible in communicating with and helping all the different communities and cultural groups that you'll meet in the Disaster Resource Center. We'll look at different ways to support different communities, but communication is really at the top of the list. It's just human nature to use the communication and social norms that we're used to, but the rules and expectations we have aren't always shared by others. For example, in many Western or European cultures, direct eye contact is seen as respectful and shows honesty, especially in the context of authority. But for many non-Western, non-European cultures, the act of making direct eye contact is seen as a sign of disrespect or rebellion. Now, this example shows us that it's okay if someone isn't making eye contact. They might just be trying to show respect. But it also shows us something more universal. Small differences in how different cultures communicate can have a major impact. Trust is essential to our mission, so we need to be ready to communicate our values and important information to all the communities we can expect to serve in a DRC.
Hi, I'm Daniel Garcia, and welcome to the Multnomah Building. In other segments of this series, we've talked about look, listen, link. We look for people who may need help, listen to their needs, and link them to the right resource or person. But I think you'll see today that each step of the process can work a little differently depending on each person and their culture. So we talked a little bit about how various communities and cultures have their own social norms. At the same time, not everyone in a community is the exact same person, and everyone reflects the community norms differently. And they reflect them differently in different contexts and relationships. Remember that misunderstandings happen, and that's okay. Recognize them with humility, and then keep going. However, if I feel I'm not the best person to communicate in a situation, or if I'm struggling or feeling uncomfortable, I try to get help. You can always link someone to a DRC coordinator or another DRC staff member who can help, especially when there's a misunderstanding or an escalating tension. You'll see lots of families coming into the DRC looking for loved ones or assistance, and the way they interact with each other or you might be pretty different from what you'd expect, so you may need to help them differently because of their cultural expectations. For example, it may be important to seek out someone's family or community elders before linking them to a resource, particularly if you're helping women and children in immigrant or refugee communities. Oftentimes, decisions aren't final until a male elder or head of the family makes their decision. In some cultures, it's inappropriate for women or girls to interact with men without a male family member present. So you might need to find a female staff member to work with women if talking to a man would be against their cultural norms. Some immigrant and refugee communities have experienced trauma and persecution at the hands of the governments they fled. So we need to be very careful about how we use our position of authority. Avoid asking about someone's immigrant status. It doesn't matter. Our job is to meet the needs of everyone who walks into a DRC, no matter who they are. Similarly, some people in the LGBTQ community may not trust first responders or medical providers because of discrimination they've experienced before. One way to work around our role or authority is by recognizing that people might be more responsive when critical information comes from a trusted community leader or elder. Try to link to a respected person within a community you're serving. Disaster resource centers will always make space for religious practices, and there are a few critical things we should be respectful of. Do your best to avoid scheduling public briefings or other possibly disruptive DRC activities during sacred times of prayer or rest. You may need to make special considerations for guests of the Muslim faith. Figure out which direction is east during DRC setup, determine the best designated sacred space or prayer area, and talk with fellow staff about it. Some religious practices require special levels of cleanliness. Listen for those needs, show people the washing accommodations, and reach out to a DRC coordinator if you need different washing accommodations. Finally, it's not uncommon for a disaster resource center to be in a church or other religious building. Be mindful and respectful of any sacred space you're working in, whether it's a building or a special prayer area inside the DRC. As staff, we don't override religious practices for our own convenience.
Hi, I'm Scotty Scott, and welcome to my office. The Pacific Northwest is home to some of the largest LGBTQ communities in the United States. Again, it's critical to our mission that everyone who walks into a DRC feels welcome, and I have a few pointers for helping our LGBTQ guests feel welcome and safe. First, accept relationships as they are. Recognize all relationships as they become apparent without questioning or jumping to conclusions. The same holds true for gender identity and expression. Avoid making assumptions about gender identity. For example, it's completely okay to just ask someone what pronoun they use. Some people may use they and them as their pronouns rather than he and him or she and her. As someone who uses they and them myself, I appreciate when people just ask me rather than making the assumption. And if you do make a mistake, don't worry. Apologize if you want, and let's move on. Appropriate and safe bathrooms are a key concern for transgender and gender nonconforming people. We should know the location of any gender-neutral bathroom on site and be ready to point people to it. Volunteers should also honor people using the bathroom aligned with their gender identity. I just try to not make a big deal out of which bathroom someone chooses, because the last thing they want during a disaster is somebody getting nosy about their bathroom practices. Finally, hate crimes and bias have a huge impact on all communities. Many people have experienced forms of racism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, or even violence, so you can expect people to be worried about their own safety in a shared space. Ask what type of emergency housing or accommodations people prefer, particularly for people who identify as transgender and gender nonconforming. Inappropriate housing can lead to harassment for transgender or gender nonconforming people, immigrants, and refugees. If you have concerns about safety, talk to your DRC coordinator about the situation.
All right, let's look at intercultural communication. Our example about eye contact from earlier was all about intercultural communication styles. Now, people from any culture would want to know the why behind a decision. People are going to ask you these more complicated questions, and answering them isn't always easy. So let's look at some ways to help communicate. People in many Western cultures, such as the dominant culture in the US, tend to be very direct. You might hear someone ask,
"Excuse me, can you direct me to reunification services?"
No context is given at all, and the question is really obvious. However, in some cultures, that could actually be considered rude. Instead, you might hear the very same question expressed like this.
So I came down to visit my grandmother. She's been a nurse downtown since about 2005, and I hopped off the Max and I heard a boom. And there was a bunch of people running around, moving all over the place, and I came down here, I signed in, and I'm looking for my grandmother, and I just don't know what to do.
In this case, the context is being communicated, but not the solution. It's up to you to listen and then link the person to reunification services.
In other instances, people of some cultures will be using qualifiers, things like perhaps or I'll do my best, to show discomfort, disagreement, or even as a way to say no. This is a good time to use some active listening. Repeat what you heard in your own words to show that you understood, and try to make sure you actually did understand. Connect what they did say to the questions you're trying to ask. The way we communicate with our bodies can be pretty different across cultures, and the differences are pretty noticeable in a disaster. Western cultures often like to use very non-emotional communication styles, even in emergencies. People from other cultures may look very emotional. People yell or use big hand gestures to communicate that someone cares or that the situation is important. Sometimes the use of personal space can also communicate friendship or respect, and people might talk very closely to each other. Be prepared for different approaches to personal space, and avoid assumptions about a person's intent when they use communication styles that make you feel uncomfortable.
One term we use is cultural humility, respecting the validity of other people's culture. Cultural humility is important to intercultural communication, especially when communication breaks down. Practicing cultural humility means being able to recognize that different cultural perspectives are equally legitimate, even conflicting ones. Suspending judgment and questioning your own perspective. Allowing others to direct us in appropriate behavior, and seeking common ground for effective interactions. Asking the right question and being respectful is important when looking, listening, and linking. Here are some great questions that can help you identify needs and link people to the right resources, while still being mindful and respectful. Do you have any needs specific to you and your family? Do you have any medical, disability, or religious accommodation needs? Do you have any specific dietary needs or restrictions?
All right, that's it for today. We've looked at a bunch of different cultural considerations for operating a DRC: communication, preferences and expectations, and even some best practices. Remember, if you need help or feel stuck, just ask for help. Someone else might actually be the best person for that interaction. And finally, don't forget that we have a whole series of training all about operating a DRC, and you're welcome to check out our other topics as well. Thanks for watching.